I am Mina Harper, chairman of the African American Quilt Documentation Project. Calvin Cooley is the chairman of the board of Summerhill Heritage Museum. He represents Summerhill on the steering committee of the African American Quilt Documentation Project. The project consists of 14 members representing historical societies, governmental institutions. So I give you Calvin Cooley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this grand occasion. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and being a native Cartersvillian, I never thought I would be standing here at this time. So I am thrilled and I'm happy for all of you and for all of our city. So on behalf of the mayor, the city council, the Bartow County government, once again I say welcome to Friendship Plaza for this grand occasion. At this time, I want to thank some of the key members of this activity, and their names are as follows. Lily Reed, the director of the Downtown Development Authority. Erlene Burke, one of her aides. Going by ear. And Mr. Barry Henderson, one of the key architects and kind of the guiding principles of this day. And at this time, if Barry's in the audience, I want to give the floor to him for a few words.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I'll keep it brief, but I really will try to keep it brief. The reason we're all here today is it's the coming together of two things. It's art and it's the community. And we started, we meaning Erlene and Lily, and also Laura J. was very involved in this. We started last August really making a viable program, trying to make a viable program out of this public art program. And we had our first public meeting back, I think it was August, I lose track of time, and in order to get input from the community. And at that meeting, Mina and Calvin and Teresa and a couple of other people from the African American community were there. And they were working on a project at that time, which was the Freedom Quilt, which was a quilt. And they said, is there any way that, maybe we could get this project involved in the public arts program? And I said, that'd be fantastic. And so it was just such almost like a gift, because it's hard enough to get a public arts program going, and I'm not going to get into all that. But when you can have a segment of the community get involved in the art, it's just wonderful. It's just fantastic. And so what happened over a good period of time, there were meetings, and then there were some representatives from the African American community, and that was Barbara Ford and Valerie, and a lot of people know, and oh my goodness, Elmer, and then Calvin, and I know I'm missing folks, and I'm sorry, but and so those people were really designated to work and represent the African American community in creating this piece. From an artistic standpoint, a good friend of mine and one of the best artists I know in Atlanta area is PK Gordis. PK, raise your hand. And and so we had PK was going to do a piece for the public arts program. So I talked to him and I said, we've got this situation up here. And what do you think about trying to do something with this historic idea? And he said, I'm all over it. So we got those people together, primarily the people that I mentioned, and with PK on a number of occasions to design what you're going to see this afternoon. And so, you know, the public arts program is taking off. I think on the 12th, which is this weekend, we will be actually talking about the other two sculptures, that the metal sculpture behind you, and there's another one over by the stage, and I'm not going to get into those now. It's just, again, it's the coming together of art and the community. And the more you can get the community involved in the art, the better the whole thing works out. And, you know, there's always somebody's got, you know, they're for this particular piece or against this particular piece, but then the two just sit there and argue about art, which is a good subject to argue about, you know. So, again, thanks very much for everybody that's been, you know, that's made this thing happen, especially the artists, and especially those people from the African American community who contribute to this and to represent their heritage and their culture, not only in this city, but I think you'll find in a talk that this Freedom Quilt represents not only the city, but a vast amount of history for them on the eastern half of the United States especially. So, done. That's, thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Now, as one, let us come together and bow our heads as I pray. Our Father, once again, a few of your servants gathered together to give you thanks for your abundant mercy and your abundant grace. We thank you for this day of celebration. We thank you for this day of coming together. We thank you for the feel of your power as the wind blows through and caress our bodies. We don't see it, but we feel it and we know it's there. We don't see you, but we feel you and we know you're here. And we are thankful for that. Father, come down, be one in the midst of this occasion, and let us join together, hand in hand and heart to heart, as we represent our past and look forward to the future. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. And now we'll give way to...
You see what Calvin can do. Every time we have a meeting, we're all separate, but he brings us together just like that. And Calvin has been the stability and the inspiration in this project. When I'm worried, I say, well, what if this happens? He says, forget it, everything is fine. So Calvin has vision, which I sincerely appreciate. Reverend Coombs came onto the committee. He represents the NAACP. I found him to be a man of ideas and action, vision, compassion. Reverend Coombs.
This was made for a big man. Today is significant because our community has chosen to come together in unity to celebrate the noteworthy resolve of African Americans to endure the struggle to freedom in the USA. Today we celebrate the African American pathway to freedom through the unveiling of a sculpture that tells a story in every stitch. This celebration of freedom is further significant because this year we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the assassination of one of this country and this world's greatest freedom fighters, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who on April 4th, 1968 was killed by an assassin's bullet. Just as Dr. King gave his life for freedom, many of the stories connected to the Pathway to Freedom sculpture also tales of the determination of others that were willing to sacrifice their life, limb for freedom. Today we celebrate the great contributions and the great determination of so many early freedom fighters that traveled a tumultuous pathway to freedom. Reverend Harris. You come up? Okay, can you get it? All right. And I'm gonna step down.
Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm Reverend Louise Young Harris, the president of Noble Hill Wheeler Memorial Center located in Cassville, Georgia, and a member of this great steering committee of the African American Quilt Documentation Project of Bartow County. And I'm also a councilwoman for the historical city of Kingston, Georgia. Today, as I stand before you, it gives me great honor and such a pleasure to be a part of this day that is going down in history as we embark upon the paths of freedom. With this sculpture that has been developed and designed, it came forward through a dream. It came forward through perseverance. It came through with determination. And as you all can see today, it is now a vision. It has came to realization. Today, ladies and gentlemen, help me, as along with Alexis Carter and Valerie Coleman, also members of the Noble Hill Wheeler board, and our curator, as we light these candles today, Pathway to Freedom. We're trying to light it. The wind don't want to be cooperative. As we light the candles, we remember the words of the Negro spiritual. Lift every voice and sing. Lift every voice and sing our great anthem. Till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. What this document represents today. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on until victory is won. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Would the steering committee stand and face the audience? You need to see this dream team of professionals. Most of them are presidents of their historical society or organization. The steering committee consists of Elmer Felton, raise your hand, Elmer, Calvin Cooley, Diane Tate, Barbara Ford, and I. Now, Calvin emphasized, when we got the steering committee together, the idea was, is this a viable project? Calvin, well, they all said yes. Calvin emphasized the preservation of African American history and culture. Diane Tate emphasized inclusion. She said, include every historical society in an institution in the county. Barbara Ford emphasized education. Elmer Felton emphasized a historical narrative. Our sculpture is a visual historical narrative. So we'll start and each person will introduce himself. Oops, this doesn't work, sorry. Well, I was to have each person introduce himself. I will introduce each person. On the end is Barbara Ford. She is president of the U. Harley Historical Society. The next is Teresa Cook. Teresa needs a part on the program. She said no. She is key to the success of the sculpture. When proposals were presented to the DDA, they didn't get excited with the 6 proposals until they saw Teresa Cook's graphic of the Freedom Quilt, the community quilt of freedom symbols. So Teresa has been fundamental. She designed the community quilt. She was the liaison from the committee to work with the sculptor. So let's give a hand for Teresa Cook. Calvin Cooley is on the City Council and he is president of the Summerhill Heritage Museum. Ann Bridges represents the Kingston Women's History Club, and they are our champions at raising money to pay for the sculpture. Many thanks. Charles Foster is our treasurer. He is on the board of the Summerhill Heritage Museum. Sherry Henshaw is, she's everything. She's Keith Bartow Beautiful, and she has provided a lot, has been a very important person on the committee. Trey Gaines, Trey was at Memories Day, George Washington Carver Park with his staff. They were documenting quilts. So is this project only about quilt documentation? When that exploratory committee met, the idea was if we can get people to look at their family quilts, start talking about family history, it will lead into that historical narrative that Elmer wanted. And so many thanks, Trey, for your contribution in quilt documentation, your professionalism, and also in inviting our speaker today. And Valerie Coleman is the curator at Noble Hill Wheeler Memorial Center. It's a beautiful place and Valerie's doing a wonderful job, so go see that. And Diane Tate is the co-president of the Etowah Valley Historical Society, our biggest supporter. The Historical Society came out first and gave us $500 for printing, a total of $950 just to be able to do business. And Reverend Louise Young Harris, she was going to miss a meeting. I said, you tell us when you can meet, we'll come to you. And she said, but I have to, not have to, no, she didn't say that. She said, but I'm praying at the Stations of the Cross the entire month of March. Great, that's just what we need, someone praying for us. So she's back. Come April 1st, she was back. Elmer Felton Henderson. I call her a minute person because she's an idea a minute. And she's on the board of the Summerhill Heritage Museum. And Molly Smith, she represents the Adairsville DDA. We welcome her. And Reverend Combs, you have met. Thank you so much, committee.
We would all be remiss if we did not recognize at this time Mina Harper, who also has given a lot of leadership to this, as I'm sure the committee will agree. Thank you, Mina. In addition to that, we have some dignitaries in the audience today that we would need to recognize. Judge Benham, we always need to recognize our favorite judge. Thank you so much for coming. We always need to recognize the sheriff, especially me, in case trouble comes, Sheriff. Thank you. Where are you? In the back. Sheriff Millsap, thank you so much for being here. Our sole commissioner in this county, who is so supportive of so many things that I care about. And Commissioner, we always appreciate you. You always step up. You always help. You're interested in the entire county. And thank you, thank you. Steve Taylor is here with us. Thank you so much. Also, I'd like to recognize the members of the ministry here in Bartow County and Lewis. That also means you in Calhoun. Would the ministers please raise your hands and stand, because you've been a real inspiration to this committee. Thank you. Carrie Roth, I saw you a minute ago, member of City Council. Calvin, one of your able members, is also with us. Thank you. Appreciate you. Did I leave out anyone? Please identify yourself. If I did, I'm trying to scan. Kingston City Council. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I knew that. You were already identified, but still, you should get it again. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mina. Again, appreciate your leadership with this austere committee.
Thank you, thank you. So you might ask, well, what is this sculpture and what's it for? Well, it's a work of art. It's aesthetic, historical, and educational. The first time I saw it, I started ascending the hill. I got lighter and lighter. I had that aesthetic experience. All the arts attempt to communicate at a more fundamental level than hello, how are you in the evening news. And when we come together as a viewer on that truth beneath the apparent reality, all our differences go away, and we are enjoying that. We are experiencing unity with each other as viewers. So it's a beautiful work of art, and it's historical, as someone has described, though it's in a quilt motif. Those blocks have conventional names as churn dash, wagon wheel, carpenter's wheel, bear claw, but according to legend, they mean much more than just that. So this sculpture symbolizes the hopes and dreams of generations of humanity under bondage in their desire for self-determination, self-realization through freedom. And it's educational. It's been educational to me, not just because of that narrative, but just working with it, looking at slavery has enabled me to look at slavery, acknowledge it, and I believe talk with African Americans about slavery easier than before, because it was a hard subject to approach. But this sculpture enables us to look at our history, to accept it, and to move on. It represents a vision to the future and hope for the future, and that message of unity. And it's educational. I had hoped that every child would get to visit it, and that every child in every church would be giving quarters to pay for it. So this has been a grassroots effort to pay for the sculpture. We've done better than expected. We were hoping for $2,000 by today. We have either promised or in hand $4,500. So if you want to give, please do. The Charles is here to take your check. The bowl is over there to take your dollars. Thank you very much. Charles and Sherry will thank the donors and do the presentation of the check to the DDA.
We have now found, since mine has been out there working, that we're $500 short on this, but I can't keep up with her fast enough. So this is our presentation. Lily, we had $4,000 as of yesterday. So we're getting up there for our total. We'll soon have everything that we need to check to give this great sculpture to downtown.
Thank you guys so much. This is an incredible gift, and the community will appreciate it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to continue to collect funds for this sculpture. It's not the end for the day, so if you got money stashed back, I'll take it. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out, supporting us. And if you want to get on any kind of committee, just hang around somebody and you'll find out that your name has been put on a list. And that's how it works around here in Cartersville. I would like to thank the kind donors and the sculpture purchase donors. Dennis Graham Construction Company, Steel Fabrication Cartersville, Etowah Valley Historical Society, Keep Bartow Beautiful, Cartersville, Bartow CBB, Bartow History Museum, Cartersville DDA Cultural Art Alliance, WBHF Radio, Cartersville Uncut, Tribune News, Fox 5 News, Ezell Watson, Ahmad Hall, New Frontier, Bridget Eppinger Green, Laura J's Design, Cartersville DDA, Judge and Mrs. Robert Benham, Sculpture Purchase Donors, Laura Magnolia Ladies Club, Uharley Historical Society, Kingston's Woman History Club, Summer Hill Heritage Group, Noble Hill Wheeler Memorial Center, NAACP Greater New Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, Nada's Financial, in memory of Mac Eppinger, by Mac Eppinger and Sons and Funeral Service, card sale. Thank you everyone for coming out, and if you have any funds that you would like to put in the bottle over there, we'd be pleased to accept them. Thank you.
I'll call Sherry Henshaw back up. She is working on the African American Heritage Trail. She'll bring you an update on what is going on there.
I'm so short, you might not see me otherwise. So, my name is Sherry Henshaw, and I am thrilled to be here today. This is wonderful. Isn't it wonderful? I just think it's a great day. And I am here because of two people that are here today. One is Justice Robert Benham, who is right over there, and the other is Steve Taylor, who's back there. I work for Commissioner Taylor in Community Development. Keep Bartow Beautiful is in that department. we do a lot of community involvement activities, and I've been working for the county since 2000, and I was born and raised here, like the commissioner was, and between us, I'm sure we know about everybody, and who we don't know, Justice Benham does. So we've got it covered, I think, pretty well. What we do in community development is we do a lot of different things in that office, but we create vibrant and healthy and vigorous communities. And as such, Justice Benham brought several years ago a project to Commissioner Taylor, and somehow I found my way in the middle of it, helping them to see this through. And the first part of it was recovering the history of Bartow Carver Park, which has now been renamed George Washington Carver Park. It was the first state park for African Americans in the state of Georgia during segregation. So that is now being overseen by the Convention and Visitors Bureau. The county had a huge part to play in that effort, and that has become a showpiece, as we will say, and we've got much more work to do on that, but we are continuing to work on that. And I hope you get a chance to go out there and enjoy that park. It is the most beautiful place on Lake Allatoona. The next thing I want to say is that when we started that project, I thought I had plenty of work to do. It took us 3 years, and memories days, oral histories, a lot of things we did to recover that history and celebrate it, and as well as a lot of work that went on down there. And I want to applaud everyone that was involved in that. The state of Georgia, through their tourism division, we did a product development grant. We received other grants to restore and renew that site, and also to preserve it. But Justice Benham said, well, I've got another little thing that I'm kind of working on, and you might be interested in it. And I reluctantly said, what is that? And he said, well, there's some more good places that we need to save. And if we don't now, it's going to be too late. And I knew this was true because the Georgia State Parks had told us they had virtually no history at all on George Washington Carver Park. And they're now doing a history of the African American parks, and most of it is based on the work that we did. There were 4 parks, and they've got more on our park than they do on anything else, based on the work that we've done in the past few years. So I said, what is it that you got? Well, I've got 9 other places that we need to save. And so I've been working on those. And that is something that the county has gotten excited about as well. We see this as a great economic development tool, and we hope that this becomes the Bartow Black History Trail or the African American Heritage Trail, whichever name tourism deems is the one they'll choose. Right now, it's in our office. It's a community development project, so it's a work in progress. And we do have the 10 sites. We have rack cards up here, and we are working with them, and that includes a lot of the sponsors that you see of these programs up here today that are involved in this effort. It goes all across the county, and as I say, pick up one of these cards, and you can see what I'm going to be working on for quite some time. The county is getting ready to put some funds into some preservation work based on approval by the federal government, and we're hoping to see a lot of work done in those sites. We've got a lot to be thankful for. So we're going forward with these projects, and you'll see more about it as it all unfolds. But the county's behind this project, and I thank Commissioner Taylor for that. Do you want to ask Justice Benham?
One thing that Sherry did not mention is that she is writing a historical narrative for those 10 historic African American sites. One of the goals of the Quilt project is to write a historical narrative. Also, Joe Head, who is founder of the Bartow History Scholar Program and who put the web page of the Quilt project online, is seeking scholarly articles on African American history. Now, the sculpture is a historical narrative. It is a visual historical narrative. I present you Elmer Felton and a presentation of music.
I'm not singing. I just wanted to tell you that the music that we're going to hear today is going to be presented by Ahmad Hall. And just for a little information about the songs like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, those were not just recreational songs that slaves sang. They were informational songs to give the other slaves time to get ready. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Those were songs to say, get ready, somebody's coming to pick you up tonight, and the next day, 2 or 3 other slaves would be gone. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, child. That was to tell you that dogs were out and they couldn't sniff you out in the water. So just a little thing about the music that slaves were singing, they weren't happy, they were trying to get away. And so, just like the quilts in plain sight, the songs were in plain ear, so you could hear, but they were informational songs to let each other know we're getting ready to make way for our freedom. Now, without any other hesitation, Mr. Ahmad Hall.
And I'm like Pastor Combs, I'm not going to attempt to stand up here. So I'm do it right here. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See the host all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. You know they look like the children that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. See the host all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. You know they look like the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Whoa, wade in the water. Whoa, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, God's gonna trouble the water.
Do you think the spirits, the souls of those slaves are hearing that? Trey Gaines, please introduce our speaker.
Ahmad, I don't think I can follow that. I was going to attempt to sing my introduction, but I think I won't now. Well, good afternoon. My name is Trey Gaines, and I'm director of the Bartow History Museum. And there goes my introduction. Thank you, Charles. It is my honor to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Ms. Phyllis Lawson. This introduction is not going to really do her justice. I had the pleasure of having lunch with her, and she's delightful. I wish you all could have time to spend with her. Ms. Lawson was born in Detroit, Michigan. At the age of 4, she was sent to the tiny town of Livingston, Alabama to be raised by her grandmother, Lula Horn, who made beautiful quilts out of the clothing of her loved ones. Each strip of fabric told the story of the wearer's life and death. I also learned at lunch that she would sit underneath the porch to hear these stories. Grandmother Horn shared these mostly tragic and sometimes witty tales with her granddaughter as she sewed their clothes into a quilt that threaded broken lives back together. After graduating from high school, Ms. Lawson joined the United States Air Force. It was one of the first female B-52 mechanics. She served one tour in the Air Force and left the service in 1978. Using her military educational benefits, she attended the University of Maryland and received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and Social Work. She spent 20 years working as a counselor for incarcerated youth, women who were victims of domestic violence, and with youth and adults suffering from alcohol and substance abuse. 3 of those years were spent in the United States Army Reserves. Following a 17-year break from military service, in 2002, Ms. Lawson returned to the military as a member of the U.S. Army National Guard and active duty service, retiring from the U.S. Army in 2013. Ms. Lawson was one of only a handful of women in the military who served in 3 major military conflicts in the Vietnam era, where she served 3 temporary duty assignments to Vietnam before the 1975 fall of Saigon. She was also deployed to Saudi Arabia as a member of Operation Desert Storm, and in December 2003 in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. She has received 3 military campaign medals for assignments where she served to support the United States Armed Services in armed conflict. After retiring from the military, Ms. Lawson spent the following 2 years writing her memoir, Quilt of Souls, released in March 2015. Since its release, her poignant memoir has received praise from social, print, and television media. As a result of the popularity of her book, she has been interviewed and appeared in over 35 media outlets, including blog talks, online newspapers, social media forums, television, radio, and media advertisements. She has also been a guest speaker at over 70 venues, including libraries, genealogical conventions, quilting clubs, book clubs, colleges, secondary schools, and monument unveilings. She now lives in Florida, and she has 2 sons and 7 granddaughters. To illustrate the relevance of Miss Lawson's presence here with us today at the unveiling of this sculpture, capturing the significance of family, perseverance, strength, and bravery, as well as the healing power of quilts and quilting, please allow me to read some of Miss Lawson's own words from her preface to Quilt of Souls. Quote, "Quilt of Souls is the story of my grandmother Lula Horn, born in 1883 and died in 1986, who made beautiful quilts from the used clothing of those who had passed on. Each piece of cloth told the story of their life and death. The weaving of their clothing into a quilt mended each broken life back together with each pull of the thread. Quilt of Souls is also about the strength of black women who prevailed before and after the turn of the century, a demographic that has gone unrecognized with no celebration of the lives they endured and upheld. There were some deep and troubled times during the 1940s and 50s when many blacks made the long trek north to large American cities in search of better living conditions. Once they got established and began having babies, hardships arose. They'd end up sending a child or 2 down south to live with grandparents they might never have met before. Sometimes these children didn't return north until they were teenagers. Sometimes they never returned. I was one of those grandma's other babies, 4 years old, taken from my home and driven 16 hours down the road in a car full of strangers, to a house in the middle of nowhere with grandparents I'd never met before. It took my grandmother's love and an old tattered quilt to repair my self-esteem and return me to wholeness. She was responsible for preparing me to overcome a myriad of obstacles and tilled the soil for my resiliency. Grandma Lula told me the stories of the amazing and often tragic lives of her loved ones as she wove pieces of their clothing into quilts she made by hand. I sat and listened intensely. I connected with those people whose stories and souls were transformed into a patchwork of healing with every pull of the thread. I knew one day I'd retell them as Grandma Lula conveyed them to me." End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Phyllis Lawson.
Good evening, good afternoon. I want to thank Mina, Lily Reed, Sherry, whoever found me on social media, because I have so much going on with the second book. I barely look at my emails, and it just happened to come by at a good time, right in the middle of publishing stuff. And so I'm really thankful that I was able to see this, because this is something after my own heart. It's all about quilting. My grandmother raised me. She was born in 1883, and she lived to be 104. I was sent down south to live with this grandmother. Like I said, I didn't know her. When I went down south, I needed something to heal, and I look at my 4-year-old granddaughters and realize I was their age when I was sent down south. I was hurt. My grandmother pulled out this old quilt that was half sewn. That quilt, my grandmother quilted to keep us warm at night, but those pieces that's in that quilt is also pieces that clothes from her ancestors. And each piece tells a story of how that ancestor lived and died. My grandmother told me the story of the people who are in those pieces of quilt, and Quilt of Souls makes up those chapters. I wrote the book for healing, and I wanted to carry on the story of my grandmother, because I know she wanted me to tell those stories. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told the same story over and over and over again. You know how old people down south, they tell you the same story over and over again. Never stop. And the things that I couldn't hear, I would crawl up under the house. You know, you can't stand around old people. So I would crawl up under the house with the chickens, move some of the chicken mess out the way, and I would just sit there and listen. I would listen as these quilters, they would gather in the front yard, and they would tell stories. Now you got to realize, I grew up with women and men who were born during the Civil War. I used to go sit on the front porch of a woman who was born in 1857. They said she was dead. My classmates said she was dead, and they used to tease me. But I called her Miss Methuselah. She really wasn't dead, and she told me the story of her ancestors. And that's the way I grew up. I grew up around old people. And it was these stories that I write about in my second book, which a publisher picked up. And they said, there's nothing out like that. I'm passing on my oral history, because oral history is becoming endangered. You know, at some point, black folks, we forgot to we stopped telling stories. But even though I used to sneak up under the house and listen to a lot of the stories, my grandmother would sit there and tell me stories about her life and the life of her family members. And I captured those stories, and I produced those stories in this book, Quilt of Souls. Miss Henshaw told me, she said, Phyllis, she said, I want you to talk about oral history, and I want you to talk about quilting. But to me, growing up 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, quilting was synonymous with storytelling. When these people could gather in the front yard, they would quilt, and at the same time, they would tell stories. And my ears would be on fire. On fire. And I used to sit and sew with my grandmother until I learned my ABCs and learned how to sling words together. That's when I dropped the needle and picked up the pen, and I knew I wanted to be a writer. So when I used to go to that 2-room school in Bethel Hill with 26 students, kids would come up to Miss Clay would have the different kids come up and recite the stories that they heard, the three little bears and the 3 pigs, and Fun with Dick and Jane, which I hated. I hated Dick, I hated Jane. The only person I liked was Spot the dog. I could have threw all of them down the outhouse in the back. So when it was my turn to come up, I used to talk about my grandmother's parents and her older sister who was killed. And the kids would just look like, what just happened here? I would talk about slavery and the stories that my grandmother used to tell me until Miss Clay showed up in my grandmother's front yard. And what I hear is that she told my grandmother, Miss Lula, I think something wrong with that child. But these were the stories that I like to hear. These are the stories that I captured. These are the stories that I fell in love with. And one of the stories that my grandmother told me, and I wanted to share this with you. My grandmother, Lula Horn, her parents, both her mother, her father, Joe and Emma Young, and her oldest sister Ella, all passed one night, and I won't tell you the story because it's in the book. My grandmother, at the age of 13, buried her sister Ella, and she left and started working for Doc Rogers at 13. Doc Rogers, then Doc Rogers' son. And when she started working for them, she met my grandfather, Edgar Horn, who was traveling on the train coming out of Louisiana, which she called hoboing. My grandfather had 468 acres in Livingston, Alabama. And she told Doc Rogers, as she was at the age of 19, 20, she told him that she couldn't work for him no more because my grandmother started having kids. And the road between, and I'm going to say it the way she did, Twix, Laurel, and Livingston, is 126 miles. My grandmother used to make that journey by 2 mules, like she said, 2 tired old mules, and a wagon every Friday. So she got to the point where she started having kids, and she told Doc Rogers, I can't do it anymore. Doc Rogers said, I tell you what, Miss Lula, I will hire a driver in an old automobile to take you between Livingston and Laurel. And that's what he did. My grandmother said she was so excited about that because that way she get to see her kids. But somehow that first week, this sheriff used to meet her right there at that Alabama-Mississippi line going into Meridian. He would pull her over and call her everything but the child of God. You think you're a white woman sitting up here, who you think? And he would make her and the driver sit in the hot sun until he got ready to allow them to move on. And she said this went on for 6 months. She didn't want to say anything to Doc Rogers about it, but it went on. And every time, every week, she was pulled over, and she sat in that hot sun on the side of the road for hours. Clothes were soaking wet. So Doc Rogers, I think he was like Mississippi Mafia. But I won't tell you what happened because it's in the other book. But she said the next time that she got there to the Mississippi line, the sheriff got out of his car, came over to the side, and said, Miss Lula, I hear you make the best tea cakes this side of the Mississippi. And my grandmother was startled, and they started talking back and forth. And me sitting up there listening, and all that anger that I had for this Sheriff Suggs who was treating my grandmother so badly. And I said, wait a minute now. He calling you nigga this and nigga that, and now all y'all talking about is exchanging molasses, exchanging recipes for some cookies or some candy. So, and she saw me getting angry. So this went on. Before long, my grandmother was going to this Sheriff Suggs' house, teaching his wife how to make quilts, teaching his daughter how to make quilts. My grandmother stopped working for Dr. Rogers, and 2 years later, Sheriff Suggs died. His wife, Molly, brought the bag of clothes, of Sheriff Suggs' clothes, to my grandmother's house. She said, you taught me how to make quilter soles, but Miss Lula, I want you to put your hands on him. I want you to make his quilt. My grandmother told me how she took his bag of clothes and put her hands down in the bag of clothes, and she said, his soul is at peace. And I said, wow. So she made him this beautiful quilt, and that she gave to the wife. Now, when my grandmother passed, Sheriff Suggs' granddaughters was at her funeral, and they still remember that quilt. That's why I always say my grandmother knew how to soften racism. All right. And she did it in her own way, because she always told me everybody got a spot of good. Mm-hmm. And she told me never to forget that. And I will always remember that story because it's a quilting story. And also, it was just the type of quilts that my grandmother made for other people. People would pass and they would bring those quilts to my grandmother's house, and she would never mix new clothes and clothes of people that had passed on. So a lot of her beliefs came from culturalism and superstition. And that's okay, because I believed it. I wouldn't cross it. But I really want to leave you with this. I have and I'm not trying to push my new book, but it is up at at Macmillan and Penguin now. So, but I want you to listen to this preference. My publisher, one of the publishers asked me. She said, I never seen writing like yours. And I said, that's because I don't talk for my characters. I allow them to speak for themselves. I'm just a conduit to get their voices known. And it was like 4 o'clock one morning. I went to start this new book, and the new book is titled Unsung. And it's for all the women quilters, butter churners, just pea pickers, those unknown, hard-working women in the South, both black and white, that you never hear anything about. So I got up early one morning, I prayed, and I said, I want to write something, the beginning of this new book, the preface, and I want it to be so prolific. I want everybody to be able to hear it and understand. Now the publisher is probably going to be the same Amy Einhorn, who also edited The Help and James Comey's new book. But she said, I never cried for nobody's book. So I said, and she read the preface. So I just want to leave you with this and tell you one thing. My grandmother used to take me to this old-time religious cemetery, she called it. And you know what she said? It was slaves buried there. And she said, the best stories that you never heard laying right here. Not here, but right here. And I didn't understand that being a little girl, but I understand it now. Somehow we got to get back to our oral histories. You know, if you got an old quilt in your closet, in mothballs, in the cedar chest, hanging up in the garage, at the top of your closet, you never need to look at that quilt. I hope you look at that quilt much different than you did before you came here today, because my grandmother said all quilts tell stories. So here I go, and I'm going to leave you with this. Sometimes when I'm all alone, my unconditionally complete and quiet resolve becomes all-consuming. During these moments, I can only hear the faint echo of my heartbeat and feel the warmth of every breath I take in and out. As I sink further inside myself, my mind begins to journey to the days of innocent childhood resplendency, fondly reminiscing the stories that Grandma Lula placed into my heart and how they embedded themselves deeply into my soul. At the age of 4, I was plucked off my front porch from the only family I knew and delivered 16 hours away, landing on the doorstep of my Grandma Lula, whom I'd never met before. I felt abandoned, alone, and afraid. In desperation, I searched for a miracle to overcome this cataclysmic loss. That miracle came in the form of my 80-year-old grandmother, who made quilts she called Quilt of Souls. It wasn't long after my arrival and the many nights of lying in bed, sobbing unfettered tears of loneliness and grief, that it happened. In the middle of weeping, Grandma wrapped me inside a tattered quilt that was made from the clothes of her loved ones who died in the face of extreme bigotry, racism, and ugliness that was pervasive at that time. Each scrap of fabric was sewn from the love that could never be taken away, no matter how hard those times were. From that moment on, I felt consoled by the spirit of my ancestors that lived within the fibers of that quilt. Lula Young Horn was born in the small town of Sandersonville, Mississippi in 1883. She was destined to quilt while growing up on the young plantation in an environment that still sat heavy under the shadow of slavery. Quilting was an enigmatic, creative gift that was dutifully passed on from her mother, Emma, and the mother of her mother. Their brand of quilting was an art form deeply entrenched in culturalism and superstition. Through oral tradition and the weaving of ripped up pieces of clothes transformed into quilts, Grandma told me stories of lives and deaths of the ones who had worn these articles. Each piece of cloth she wove into her quilts bore stories of the person's hardships, suffering, love, loss, and unfulfilled dreams and desires. The sewing of their clothing into a quilt symbolically mended every broken life back together with each pull of the thread. Once she'd complete a quilt, I'd sit and watch as she ceremoniously placed it in the hands of the expired loved one's family member. She wanted them to know that the quilt would act as a talisman for anyone who wrapped themselves in its comfort, as it would forever provide protection and safety. I grew exponentially during those 9 years with Grandma Lula and had barely cracked the door to prepubescence, yet I'd already developed a burgeoning curiosity the size of North America. I was both fascinated and intrigued by the amount of information that was inside this woman who was born while the ink was still drying on the Emancipation Proclamation. Barefooted, I'd run along the sandy roads of my small rural community while being chaperoned under the watchful eyes of the tall Alabama pines, then return to lay in the rich, cool dirt under the house of my youth. There I'd watch, attentively scouring my grandmother's eyes as she made quilts and told stories along with other elderly women who sat perched in our front yard. My eyes were like heat-seeking missiles as I locked onto their conversations, peering and intensely embracing every word. Through their colloquy, I gained knowledge, strength, purpose, determination, and the grit I'd heavily rely on to sustain me as I grew into adulthood. The sharing of these stories represents the unsung life that many women from Grandma Lula's era endured. They quietly suffered from bigotry, sexism, racism, colorism, and many other isms that still seek to be identified. It's how these women overcame the indignities during that time. Like my grandmother, many made quilts. They were butter churners, laundresses, storytellers, but their lives have largely gone unnoticed because no one told their stories until now. The spirit of Grandma surrounds me during these ruminations. I can feel, smell, touch, and inhale her thoughts. I've grown to be even more awed by her innate ability to narrate, memorialize, and fuse together the intricate lives of folks, then mesh them into grand storytelling as though they only happened yesterday. It's been well over 50 years since the first time I listened to Grandma's tales of her past. However, I can still recall the gripping, often devastating, yet inspiring stories of immeasurable resilience that floated from her lips and landed into my ever-expanding heart. Gratitude is my mantra for being able to store Grandma's stories in my mind's way station. And when all's quiet, the windows of reflection and introspection open wide and fill my room with the stories that shape my life and speak through me now as I weave my own quilt in the form of words upon these pages. I'll always remember the way in which Grandma Lula, just an ordinary woman picking cotton, shelling peas, and raising her grandbabies, set in motion an extraordinary chain reaction that would change me structurally and intuitively forever. My pen is her needle, my ink is her thread. This is my history and yours. Thank you.
She told us another story. We don't want you to stop. Could you tell the story about when someone died and the dog tried and hang out the quilts?
Oh. My grandfather loved funerals, and he would take me on them. Those were the days you probably don't remember when they would just put the body in the dog trot, and you would just come and just see the body. And I don't think they had many black funeral homes then. And when you would go over there, you would see all these quilts that look like that, that look like these. They would all be hanging outside along with the mattress. And it was so many superstitions where you had to, if a person died in the house, you have to hang the mattress out, and you have to hang all the quilts and the bedding out, and you have to put the body in the ground before, you can't let the sun shine on the open grave. Otherwise, they would have to wait till the next day. But they were quilts that looked like that. And I would say, oh my. And I can tell you that my grandmother used to always tell me, my mama made quilts that helped slaves get away. And I never really thought about it until now, today. And I never really paid, and I don't have any chapters in the book about that, but that always come back to my mind. Because I had when he sung the song of Swing Low and Sweet Chariot, I also, and my cousin who's here, and he's gone now, but he also was raised by my grandmother. But Aunt Tootney lived, he's back there. She lived about 2 miles down the road, and she was taught by my great-grandfather, who was a member of the slave narratives, Josh Horn, of how she used to make those field calls, those hog calls, and you can hear her 2 miles down the road. And she learned that from her Papa Josh, and he said to learn that and to remember that. And I can do it right now, but I'm not. If you go and look up Annie Grace Horn Dotson, and listen to her sound, listen to her song. It's such a guttural song because I know her husband, it was supposedly that her husband and her youngest son was lynched, so she pretty much was a widow, and I used to go and sit on her front porch. And she used to sit there and sing those songs that used to go through one ear and out the other. It was so strong and powerful. But she also was a quilter, and you walk into her room, she had quilts stacked up on the bed this high. This high. And I had one of her quilts. I don't know what happened to it, but that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, very interesting. We're going to turn our attention to the sculpture and the sculptor. So this letter is from the committee to PK. I must say it's been such a joy. How do you find such a person? And thank you, Barry, for finding this person for the committee. May 10th, 2018. Dear Mr. Cordis, the African American Quilt Documentation Project of Bartow County welcomes with grateful appreciation Pathways to Freedom, A Story in Every Stitch, your beautifully rendered sculpture. It is aesthetic, historical, and educational, a fitting tribute to the generations of humanity under bondage. In that soulful place to which art takes us, the essence of an art subject, our differences disappear and we as viewers are united. Thank you for your labor and thank God for your life and talent. As Rabbi Nachman of Breslau once said, the day you were born is the day God decided, and he's talking about all humanity here, the world could not continue to exist without you. Okay, would you like to speak?
I'm just gonna keep it very quick. I would like to thank everyone for this opportunity. It's an honor. A lot of help from Mina, Teresa Cook, Barbara Ford, and Barry Henderson. Thank you very much.
And here is your letter. Okay, here's your letter.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
for your records, your legacy.
I will keep it. Thank you.
Story in every stitch.